Hello YouTube. I'm out today at a local nature reserve I haven't been to before. The main path is down there, but I just shot up onto this small path. See if I can make my way up here instead. Being a bit more secluded. But hopefully it's not going to be overgrown at some point. Might get stuck. Anyway, I'm making my way through the whole nature reserve right to the top, and then I'm going to try and look at what these on the map. It shows some hills at the end. I'm not sure if they're proper hills or nothing special, but I thought something to aim for. Do a little short walk, and I can have a little chat today when I get there about paganism. Should be interesting. Well, that just took me back to the main path again, I think, really. So yeah, there are lots of little trails going off, but it doesn't take you very far. It's quite dense woodland down here though. Quite a lot of useful trees there actually. Just came up a steep hill out into the open. Always makes such a big difference when you've come from somewhere that's really enclosed to somewhere that's out in the open and you can see far. You feel that difference a lot more, the contrast. Something I really hate, like all along this field, is fresh barbed wire. There's no cattle in there. There's no cattle in there. As far as I know, you're only allowed to use barbed wire when there's a risk of, you know, actual animals, cattle, breaking through either side. And you can see this is a farmed field. I don't think there's cattle on there. And that's a public nature reserve, so yeah, I don't think there should be it really. It's brutal. Like, the path is here, literally my shoulder is like inches away from it, walking along a public right of way sort of thing, a public path. And I've seen barbed wire going right across the public path. It's totally illegal. I won't say whether I cut it or not, but yeah, a bit annoying really. Okay, I'm going to have to take back what I said. Conservation grazing. This is 4 longhorn cows in there. I mean, there's a gate here, so I don't think it's necessary, but maybe the farmer or someone was a bit pissed off about it, and that's why they've put this barbed wire up. Still think it's totally unnecessary, but there you go. Okay, so we're now on the Windmill way, which is a long distance path. Just going to follow this down, track this down, and try and dive off to Windmill Hill, which is about 120 metres high. It's, you know, it's only a small hill, so Hertfordshire Hill. I suppose this is still Hertfordshire, I don't know, because the borders are quite confusing around here. We're up North Hertfordshire, so you can easily change between counties pretty quickly without you realising. But yeah, see if I can get up onto that hill. If not, I'll just find a nice area. Doesn't really matter, but just winging it. I haven't really got too much of a plan. Okay, we're at the top of Windmill Hill. Came from down here. It's not an official path, but it's very obvious vehicle track, and you know, I'm not crushing any crops or anything, so. But yeah, it's a high point for around here. Looking at the map, I think it's the highest point. Anyway, I think I'll pitch up here and have a drink and talk about what I meant to talk about in this video. So, got to come to a high point. Kind of makes sense. I mean, I'm exploring the area as well. Wanted to do this on some tumulus and burial mounds, or somewhere with some more significance, but it just for whatever reason hasn't happened, so I thought I'd just kick it off. I'll probably do several videos on it, but our ancestors would, especially in England, or in Britain I suppose, would use these high points a lot, and there's a lot of ridge walks, the Ridgeway in particular, that it does go up and down, but it crosses all the high points of a ridge, and a lot of hill forts, which some people believe were used as, you know, as actual forts. Some people believe that that's the wrong way to call them, because it's not really a fort, it's more of a settlement. You know, people would actually live there on the high points, so it makes sense to make this video on a high point. Now when I say paganism, it's for want of a better word. It's fairly common knowledge now. If you're into paganism, you'll probably know that the word comes from a Roman Latin word, paganus or paganus, or however you want to pronounce it, but it basically means like country dweller, and I think it's a derogatory term because the more kind of the people that consider themselves more civilized in Rome, and a bit more forward-thinking part of the culture, considered were Christian, and they considered the folk that believed in the old gods, what we would call the pagan gods, the Roman gods, still lived out in the country and were a bit behind the times. So I suppose it's a bit like, you know, comparing people that live in rural areas today to modern city folk in London who believe that they're ahead of the curve and, you know, on the latest trends of civilization and what culture and the way people should be thinking going forwards and stuff like that. And now we use it just to sort of, it's quite an open term now, pagan, really, and it sort of encompasses anyone that isn't monotheistic in their beliefs and believes in some sort of culture or spirituality alluding to several gods, like some sort of pantheon, and worshipping nature and ancestors. So it's quite an open term now, but most people use the word pagan because it's just the go-to word. It's the easiest word to use now, and we pretty much know what it means, everyone, now. So, you know, I have used more longer sort of terms, like what I follow and believe in is, I suppose, indigenous European spirituality. But then I've got a lot of respect for, you know, the Native American, the Aborigine, even Japanese Shinto and stuff like that, which could all be considered pagan. That's not European. I suppose I don't really immerse myself in that. I don't follow that. Whilst I respect it and I see the similarities, it's not closest to my heart, I suppose, because this is my land. I don't think any one people, any one culture, any one version of paganism or anything is better than the other. It's not about that. It's just what I feel a connection to, and obviously my ancestry is going to be around this part of Europe. It might not be exactly Britain, depending on how far you trace it back, but it's going to be Northern Europe kind of thing. And, you know, you could go into a lot of detail about the history of it, maybe not in this video, but when you touch on it, you see all the different, the Indo-European connection, which is something worth researching, the Indo-European invasion and how they somehow took over from the hunter-gatherers. You know, some people say displaced them, killed them, some people say they merged with them. History tells us that it's usually a bit of both, isn't it? So all these beliefs, these sort of European pagan beliefs, come from, I suppose, the Indo-Europeans, and that's generally accepted. But some of it may have come from hunter-gatherers too. But like I say, it gets really complicated. When you look at the genetics, the biology side of it, it gets complicated because technically the people of Britain were, you know, the hunter-gatherers, some sort of early Indo-Europeans, maybe the Belbeca people, the Celts. The Romans came and went and didn't leave really any blood trace, any genetic trace. So we're not really Roman. And then the Germanic tribes came. The Angles, Saxons, Frisians, Jutes, what we call Anglo-Saxons, the Germanic tribes came in, and so did the Norse. Some of the Nordic tribes were very closely related to the Germanic tribes anyway, in terms of biology and even their culture and stuff. So it sounds like a massive mix, but really, actually genetically, we're not that far removed still from the hunter-gatherers, but we also share genetics with the Celts and the Germanic people that came here, and none of those are a million miles from each other genetically anyway. But one thing you've got to remember is that the British Celts weren't necessarily the same as other Celts. Celtic is quite a broad term in itself, and like, it doesn't mean that the Celts of Britain were related to biologically and that close to the Celts in North Africa. You know, it's a long way away. So culture and spirituality are a bit different to biology, although they sometimes do go together. It gets complicated, it gets messy, and I'm not an academic or an expert enough to really say. So, but there is some science behind the biology side of it, and as DNA tracing gets better. I suppose the biggest difference is the difference between Celts and Germanic tribes, but even those, when it comes to the British ones, biologically not a million miles off. There's similarities in the culture and spirituality through the Indo-European connection, and like I say, the hunter-gatherers biology still, the blood still kind of remains today. So it's not that complicated really when you think about it. The British are the British and always have been. When you get into the details, that's when it looks very different. But because of this complexity, that's why I don't really try to be too specific with my version of paganism. I feel a connection, like, to the land, to the ancestry, to the spirituality. I'm not religious in any sense, but spiritual, I suppose. And it's a bit more generic for me. I just call myself pagan because it's simpler than saying I'm a druid or a heathen or a Wiccan or whatever. And some people might have certain practices. Again, I'm not against it. I'd investigate it. Like, I'd try certain things in the future, meeting groups, stuff like that. But for me, just this sort of coming out into nature, sitting at the top of a hill, visiting burial mounds, that for me is the spiritual side of it. I could sit just near a burial mound and just sort of, I suppose you try and tune into your senses and imagine, you know, your ancestors and what came before. A connection to nature. I think that's the commonality between paganism, really, is nature and ancestors. It doesn't have to be ancestors necessarily, but I think you've got to have some sort of connection to nature, some sort of worship of nature to be pagan. That's what I'm really trying to say, apart from waffling on. To sum it up, like, as a whole, paganism is, you know, seeing nature, I suppose, as your most powerful instead of a god. And there might be deities or gods to represent aspects of nature, but to me those deities are the aspects of nature. Thor isn't, let's take Thor for example, because everyone knows Thor, isn't a god who is up in the sky like a guy who controls lightning and the weather. To me, Thor is the lightning and the weather. Doesn't matter where you are in the world, it's still Thor. It might take different forms, different names, but it's the same thing. And then more specifically, European paganism and the European land, I feel more of a connection to, because it's no doubt where I'm from, where my ancestry is from. And then more specifically than that, I suppose the British side of it, because it's sometimes harder to attain. Actually, it's harder to get knowledge about the British side of paganism, and even then the Celtic stuff is stronger. Finding out Germanic paganism is even more difficult. But I do feel more of a connection to, you know, the closer land. So Britain, I've never been patriotic in the sense of, you know, supporting government laws, the royal family, the army, the navy, the institutions. Is the Church of England, obviously not Christian, but that side of it I just never understood that. It doesn't work for me. I suppose that's nationalism, and I'm just not nationalistic in any way, shape or form, but I suppose I'm patriotic in a sense of I feel a connection to the land, the nature, the ancestry, the history, the culture, but not institutions. Anyway, I'm sure I've forgotten to say a lot of what I actually wanted to say, and probably said a lot of what I didn't plan to say, but I'll have to edit this video down. It is the 3rd? Yeah, the 3rd of July, and Saturday England are playing tonight in the Euros. I doubt I'll get this edited and out tonight, so this will be old news by the time this video comes out, but that sort of ties in with, you know, what I was thinking about with the connection between British paganism, you know, nationality, identity, supporting a football team. So before I get moving on, I just want to say one last thing on the same topic, sort of. We don't have to all be the same. We can all be different, you know, from country to country, from race to race, religion to religion, whatever, town to town. It doesn't matter. We are all different, and that's all right. That's fine. That's great. The world's more interesting if we're all different and we can learn from each other, rather than this trying to destroy ancestry and history and culture and identity and try to make everyone the same. It's never going to end well that way. You're just going to end up with a lot of hate. Just let people have their identity, let people be different. It's much more interesting that way anyway. Okay, here we are, this kind of crossroads of paths. I'm turning right here and back onto the Windmill way again. So we'll just follow this all the way back to that nature reserve that I started in. So yeah, it took a bit of finding my own way a bit along that road to get back onto the paths. But you know, I've got the OS maps on View Ranger, so always just fall back on that really. Okay, so I think I'll leave it there. I'll do more videos about it in the future, or I'll talk about it more anyway. But for now, good luck tonight England, and yeah, get outdoors and enjoy nature.